So when we or you talk about death literacy, what do you actually mean by it?
So death literacy is our know-how about death and dying, and we usually think about it as an acronym, or it makes it easy to think about anyway. So, and that acronym is SEAK, SEAK. So when we're thinking about death literacy, we're thinking about our skills, what are the ways that we can talk about death and dying and care, what are the hands-on experiences we might have or need to contribute to care. Experience is reflecting on our experiences and being able to also understand how those experiences have affected us. So it might be caring experiences or past experiences with death and dying. And action is about our understanding of what services and supports are in our community so that we can take action if we need it. And I imagine as we talk today, that'll become clearer. We often think about like things like death literacy, which sounds in a way kind of quirky and a bit kind of clinical. It's not just an individual thing. It's something that we interact, that comes to us via interaction and in connection with other people. So that action part of death literacy is actually quite important and quite central to the concept. And then knowledge is our, kind of knowledge about, do I know how to get access to palliative care if I need it? Do I know what an advanced care directive is? Do I know how to do my funeral plan? So it's a multi construct, and it's meant to be a kind of practical construct. And I guess the other thing I would say about that is that it's come from a body of research. We didn't just kind of invent it. It came from a body of research around carers and what carers were telling us happened for them while they were caring, and that experience of care.
Yeah, okay. So how did you stumble into this line of work to start with? Or did you stumble?
All the work. Yeah. Well, I didn't really stumble. I'd have to say. I from a young person, I started to, well, as a young person, like many young people in Australia, I had my first bereavement, my first significant loss of my grandmother. And it was that experience that led me down a path of becoming a volunteer at Camp Quality at a very young age. And I did that for many years. And then that kind of set me on a path where I knew that I wanted to do something related to palliative care. And I ended up going to university and becoming a psychologist and becoming a palliative care bereavement coordinator. That was kind of my first job out of uni. And in Western Sydney, it was fantastic. It was such a fantastic job. And that just led to so many opportunities and things. And so, yeah, I had quite a, I don't know, determined was the word that I was going to say, but I'm not sure. It was, I kind of knew really where I wanted to head, and I was very interested and curious. I think the name of your blog is of your podcast is a perfect name for talking about death, actually.
Yeah. Yes, true.
And I think I was curious, was clinician for many years, have been a clinician on and off through my whole kind of career, and then started doing research probably the last 15 years.
Fascinating. It's a very interesting combination that sort of brought you to where you are. Now, the umbrella of death literacy, like you were mentioning, and the skills and knowledge and everything that goes into it, how much of that is, actually formed through lived experience of, caring for someone, grief, being around death, and how much can we actually sort of teach and build without having to go through those experiences?
Such a great question. I think actually both. What we see in the research that we've done, so we've done quite a a few projects now, national studies, as well as studies that have involved education and teaching in community and for allied health professionals. The first thing is wherever someone has had experience related to death and dying, so they've cared for someone, in our recent research, people who went through COVID or have had some connection to voluntary assisted dying, those people tend to have high death literacy. And so why we can't, because of the way the research was structured, that's not a causal effect, but there's some association there. There's some connection there that's strong enough that it's coming up in the work that we do. And so that tells us, and this is what the original research kind of showed, is that people who have had lived experience have had access to a level of caring and a level of death and dying and a level of kind of experience that you can't access unless you've been through that. And so certainly death literacy is higher for those people. When we run death literacy themed or death education or training for health professionals, we find we can still provide learning opportunities. We don't do it didactically, though. We don't do traditional kind of education in those circumstances, and certainly we promote a very experiential learning. And it seems that arts-based programs where you can think and reflect and watch a film and talk about it, these experiences are just really wonderful for death literacy, because people are kind of thinking about what those experiences mean to them and their life.
Okay, so you found that, doing it with other people was a lot more beneficial in terms of improving that death literacy, or?
That's I would say that's never been tested, Aidan. That's a great question for anyone listening who's a researcher out there. That's a good question. We don't know that, and I think that's the field itself. We only defined death literacy in 2016. So everything we've done between 2016 and now, so 10 years of work, everything we've done is new. So everyone has, and that's kind of there's been some really interesting things that have happened. Probably the thing that has set the field off, to kind of link back to your question about individuals versus community members learning in a way that helps their death literacy. So there's a couple of threads to it. The first is when we developed the Death Literacy Index, that's enabled us to operationalise the concept of death literacy into a way that we can understand it more and test some of these ideas. So we now have, I think, about 15 validated versions across the world, so other countries are now also starting to lean into understanding some of these things and understanding the impact of death literacy on behaviour and so on. So that's the first thing. We're still learning, and we still don't know that. We do know, however, from some of our recent research, that where social capital and connection and trust and reciprocity and all of those things that happen in a community where people feel connected to each other, the death literacy is naturally higher in those communities. So there's something about, it's not just about your own personal attitude about death. It's not just about that. That's there, but it's not enough to help to lean us into kind of action, or to lean us into other aspects of death literacy, which seem to be about being socially embedded, socially connected in this. And we reflect on this stuff all the time, and I suspect we're actually just describing something very simple, Aidan, like all research and all things that we're doing, which is you used to learn this stuff in your community. You used to learn it from your parents. You used to watch your mum or your aunt or someone in your community or an elder do care. We had morning rituals. We had kind of social conventions and cultural conventions that kind of really shaped how we cared, how we supported our bereaved, what we did when someone died. We had all those social conventions, and we have, over kind of the past 100+ years, lost those social conventions because of some, structural and changes in our society. So I think what we're describing is that, and trying to help people think about how they best reclaim some of that in their own life.
Yeah, yeah. That line of thinking came up quite quickly when I was sort of thinking about this a bit more deeply. And one of the things I've heard from quite a few people is something seems to, so when you're around someone who has died, like actually the body of them themselves, especially someone who they love, when you see them, that sense of, I guess, the sense that made them who they are seems to have gone, and that is actually quite strangely peaceful for the family member or the loved one, seeing that, okay, they're not there anymore. It's quite consoling in a way, and it provides a little bit of peace or closure. And then going on to what you were talking about, that used to be just very commonplace. We would have the body in the house, and you'd prepare it, and you'd be part of that process, and we've lost that. But I guess, what are the big parts of that you think are most beneficial? Is it sort of part of what I said about that closure, or is it something else?
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
To that answer.
That's probably too much.
So there's some nuance here. I think there's no blanket right way for everyone. And I think there's something, and certainly something we hear in the community and when people talk, there's something about, I want to know enough about death and dying and loss and grief so that I can access the choice and options that are important to me. And I think it's that kind of connection of, I kind of have a sense of me and what how I am in the world, and what would be helpful for me in caring or grieving, and does the world provide that? So, and can I get access to that if I need it? So I think in those situations, that is the most beneficial, I guess, for people. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
again, if I think about my mum, who died last year, her dying at home was really important. Not for me, not for my family. That was important. It was important for us, but it was important to us because it was important to her. And her coming home and being in her home with her family surrounding her 24 hours a day, and being able to have a cup of tea that was really hot, and not, like the hospital lukewarm kind of version. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though she never really got through a cup of tea the whole time she was home before she died, but the fact that she could take a couple of sips of a boiling hot cup of tea was so rewarding. And having her pets with her, and having her grandchildren around her, if we weren't able to access that, I think the memories of that time would be much more distressing for us. It would have been different. Our ability to have the children around, for example, the pets around, the food, the friends that just came in and out, all of those things would have been much more difficult. And that, for us and our family, that would have been really challenging. In order to get mum home, we absolutely had to activate our death literacy and get access to the things that we needed to get her home, and transported home from hospital, for example, and some of the things and equipment that we needed, and so on. So yeah, we absolutely activated that. But it wasn't just me activating it within myself or my brother activating it within him. Not that I want to speak for him, but I had to reach out to friends, and ask for help and ask them to help me find the services and supports that we needed. And they were able to do that for me, and for us in that situation. So yeah, that to me is like a real, I got to kind of live some of the stuff we talk about, in a really very intimate experience.
Yeah, no, there's something very beautiful about that. If you don't mind me asking, personally, how did that experience shift the way you view death and dying?
Well, so I've been around a lot of death and dying because of my work, with a lot of dying people and their families. And I think all of that certainly prepared me, in some ways, for the experience with my mum and my family. It certainly helped on a deeper level to make sense of the social capital findings and the social connection findings, which we kind of knew, but I really kind of like feel that almost on a cellular level, Aidan. And caring for someone so intimately is like really hard work, and I think that's something we talk about. I think what it did, what I've reflected on since is, it was like hard work, it was emotional work, and it was incredibly like a really special experience. Often in this space, care and caring for older adults is often talked about like a burden, and certainly it is challenging, and so it has made me reflect a lot on the social messaging that I hear. So hearing about the tsunami of older people, hearing about myself as someone who is caring for children and for older adults as a sandwich and part of the sandwich generation. Some of those things I probably didn't, some of those terms that I've heard, and I've probably, I've said them myself, I would say, in, podcasts and other things like this. It's really changed and challenged some of my ideas, some of the things that I hear around those perceptions on care, I guess. It's made me reflect a lot about how we think about care and the care that we provide and the way that we talk about that in society. And we talk a lot about it being a burden. And I would say it absolutely is hard and it is challenging. And there's lots of things that you have to do in regards to care and caring. However, we often don't hear in the media or in the general public kind of conversations about the positive aspects of care, or the things that I learned, or the things that were kind of special, or they're not the dominant part of our conversations. And so while we do need to advocate for things that need to change in our community, there's also kind of this other side of things that we don't get to hear the incredible gift that caring can be.
One of the findings that some of your research showed that I guess surprised me, but again, I hadn't looked into it a lot, so maybe it's not so surprising, was that when people have higher death literacy, it seems to reduce their fear of other people's dying, but didn't seem to have so much of an impact on their own fear of, their own mortality and themselves dying. What what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that gap exists?
Yeah, well, I think so. Death literacy and death competency or death anxiety seem to be related but kind of separate things, and so there's and again we're still learning about what it all means in terms of the research and the work that we're doing and others are doing too in this space. There's something so when we talk about fear of death, it's usually about managing your own anxiety in the face of your own mortality. You know, that terror management theory or kind of death anxiety where you actually have to be able to kind of tolerate the fact that you're going to die and care for someone, and have a conversation about bereavement and not cross the street, but actually walk up to someone and respond to their grief and respond to them. So that's like a really important kind of competency. But yeah, it can be helpful. It's not always translating to. It seems to be translating to care of others, but not necessarily in terms of it doesn't necessarily reduce my own anxiety about myself, about the fact that I'm going to die. And I think we still need to learn more about that and why that is, but it's certainly an interesting finding.
Have you found either in your own work or other research out there, what sort of things typically do reduce that personal fear or anxiety around dying?
Well, a lot of the research talks about exposure and having access to being able to kind of self-soothe in the face of those thoughts and and those experiences. So I think, again, I would say it kind of comes back to having the experiences and having support, being in a social environment that enables you to reflect on that experience, talk about that experience, address some of the fears that come up around it, so that you're not just getting stuck with how difficult it is or about the kind of the distress that you might be feeling. In extreme examples, that there are treatment programs now around death anxiety, so people can access kind of support for really, we're talking about a kind of clinical end of a spectrum where people are really deeply distressed by the thought of death.
Yeah. I don't know if you've looked into it much, but I know that there's been a few research trials around the world, one in Australia in particular, but looking at like psilocybin and psychedelic assisted therapy for especially terminal patients or people with that death-related anxiety, that they've shown quite a big reduction in only 1 or 2 sessions, which is pretty amazing. But I don't know if you've sort of kept up to date with that.
Only a little bit.
Yeah,
it's really it's such a wonderful space to know that people have access to that kind of therapy that will support them, because I think going towards your death with significant anxiety about your death, what happens at end of life is that it really can stop conversations about what matters, about legacy, about planning well, so wills and advanced care planning and other kinds of planning that you might want to do. Severe death anxiety or anxiety about death can really prevent all of that, and that's where. So I think, to go back to your question before, death anxiety is about individuals, about something that sits in the individual, whereas death literacy doesn't just sit in individuals, it sits socially, it's socially embedded. So that's why they're related but not the same, and why you can have both at the same time.
I guess, yeah, like you said, such a young industry and research area that hopefully over the next 10, 20 years is a lot more exciting findings from all sorts of angles as well.
The trial, so anything that reduces anxiety opens up the system and opens up the community and enables that kind of reciprocity and those relationships to kind of function in a really supported way. So that's a cool thing, Aidan.
You did bring up earlier about one of your, I think it's pretty recent paper that came out looking at that community connection aspect and how that can influence the death literacy. What question did you sort of have going into that research, or did it sort of just come out from what you were looking into?
So we started to look at the data really, and we had a hunch about social capital going into that last round of research. And we'd done a national study in 2019 pre-COVID and voluntary assisted dying, and then we had an opportunity in 2023 to ask questions about COVID and VAD and make sense of any change that had happened between this kind of natural social change, really. Two massive things in the death system changed. So we needed to ensure when we did our survey that we included some of the social elements, because we knew during COVID that a lot of the natural coping and a lot of the natural kind of social elements were completely disrupted. And we thought, if we don't ask about social things, we will we'll miss an opportunity to kind of understand more about that. So there were two papers actually, and both of them looked at social capital in kind of different ways. But so we went into that study thinking more about the social, because we were adding COVID and VAD to the questions. So we wanted to understand what were the relationships and connections around some of the social, some of the social changes were there. We thought, because the original research was about networks and networks of care, and though we didn't measure social capital, we inferred it from the work that we'd done with the social network analysis. This was an opportunity to kind of see if we could measure it and also look at other elements, other things as well. So that's kind of where we were at going in.
Was that the research where you were mentioning sort of conversation climate around death? And could you just explain what that means?
Yeah, it was people's perception around, I could talk about death in my community, I could talk about death and dying around here. That's okay. So we asked about that as well. In
practice, what does a healthy conversation climate mean then around death?
What's have you got a sense of that? I can tell you what you think, and then I'll.
Yeah, okay. Let's put me on the spot. I think, so I guess part of what you just said about how comfortable people are bringing up the topics and maybe mentioning death just in normal everyday experience, where, and it might be like a older generation, younger, being able to, broach the topic, because sometimes it feels, especially from a younger to an older person, that it's being a bit, I don't know, taboo or something to bring up death because it makes them think that they're on the way out or something. I don't know. I don't know if that's close to the mark or not.
Yeah, that's it. Literally, a sense of, if you bring the topic up, is it okay? Is there a kind of and we did talk about the idea of kind of moving from normalising these conversations to socialising them because of that. And so really that that normalising is good. We want to normalise things. We want to normalise conversations. We want to normalise choices around death and dying. We want to normalise it in the workplace, particularly kind of grief responses and caring that happens in a workplace. So we want to normalise it. But I don't know. I kind of have this hypothesis I want to test more, which is that takes us only so far. And some of the data shows us that. It only takes us so far because again, it goes back to the individual. I can normalise it for myself. That's cool. I feel okay about talking about death. But if I go out into my community and no one else is talking about it, and there isn't kind of an openness, or there is some challenges around that, then actually I'm more isolated than I was before. So when we think about all the education that we're doing out in communities, and when we think about all the government initiatives that are happening, awareness and normalising is just part of the story. And so we were interested in trying to lean a little bit more into some of those ideas, because we think that normalising is just going to take us part of the way. Socialising is getting back to what we were talking about before, which is I go to an event and I do some education, but actually people didn't just talk at me the whole time. I had an opportunity to tell stories with the people beside me. I had an opportunity to reflect on my experiences. I got to be around an environment that was actually quite social and quite lighthearted, or however it was, but it wasn't just a didactic experience. There was an experiential element to it. I think it's that kind of socializing aspect that's probably going to reconnect us to some of our death literacy in the broader community.
Yeah, okay. So my, I guess, hunch about that, yeah, same with a lot of topics that are heavy topics, but I guess having the conversations in a way that isn't so heavy, just at least to start with, is a good sort of way to get the conversation going in a way. That was sort of how I would think maybe a good way to get into it might be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everyone's got a story, right?
Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. Everyone's lost someone.
Yeah.
Everyone's moved house. Everyone's been through a loss of a job or a loss of something important to them. So we've all got some level of death literacy, even if we haven't been through a death. We know what it's like to lose people. We know we've been to a funeral. All of us have some element. Yeah.
Yeah. So part of why I'm curious about the sort of work you're doing is, on one side, I think I've probably had a fairly sheltered life from death so far. Like, I've had a few family members die, but
yeah,
no one that's been super close that was, I guess, sudden or tragic. And I think I contemplate my own death and mortality fairly regularly. I can't compare it to anyone else. But obviously I'm very grateful that I haven't had those experiences yet. But I guess on the other side of that does leave me with a little bit of low-level angst that I know it's around the corner at some point. As I get older, my family's getting older. That means that, they will start, I will start to have those people close to me die. When you hear that, how do you sort of view death literacy in someone like me?
Yeah. So, firstly, I would say, you know more and have more in you than you realise, I suspect, in terms of your experiences. And I would say, what are your values for your family around loss and grief and care, or even just care? How do you view that as a family? And think about those values and let them guide you to think about what you might or might not need to do about that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yep. That'll give me a bit to think about.
And use that to potentially reach out to the people you already have in your life, the people you love, your closest friends and family who have been through those losses. Have a chat with them about what they learnt from that experience, all of it, the good and the bad, and have those conversations with your nearest and dearest.
Yes. Okay. Definitely. That actually sounds like a really good idea. Chatting to some of those people about it. Yeah. That's my head's spinning already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot again, but yeah, like in what way? Well, like think about it. You're a parent, yeah, with okay, and so when you were thinking about your values and the kind of values associated with being a parent and how you were going to do that parenting and what was important to you about being a dad, there would have been values you drew upon that you went, yeah, that's important. Like, you know, trust is really important in our family, and this is how we do trust together. Turning up for each other is another value we have. Yeah, like we've all got those kind of values that guide us, and they can really guide us into these kind of scary things too, because they're kind of solid, right? Our values don't shift too much in our lives.
Yeah. I never actually, because I've thought about values quite a bit, but I've never thought about them in that context of death and end of life sort of thing. So yeah, I'm definitely going to have to think about that a little bit more. I guess that's part of I've heard you mention sort of like talk, plan, and prepare for the inevitable. So that would then obviously factor into that process a little bit. When after the value sort of side, if you haven't had a big loss personally, someone who's listening, or obviously fire it back at me again, but what would be some other useful ways that might help that process a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. So one of the things you could do is, and I'm not meaning to sound like I'm spruiking our website, but the Death Literacy Institute website, we have the Death Literacy Index on there, and you can go in and just do it. Like it's just on a Google form, and you don't get a score or anything. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because there's something we've been cooking at La Trobe that will really be very helpful, I think, to really support this process. But at the moment, you can go on there and look at your death literacy, and you can see kind of what you score high and what you score low on, literally, because it's a scale from 1 to 5, and you can see, where you are, and you can use it really as a way to self-reflect. That self-reflect and then kind of think about what you might want to do about that. So, and that's certainly one of the barriers that we've identified, and we've started to, because there's hundreds of events. Like it's Dying to Know Day on Saturday, for example, and there's hundreds of conversations going on this month around dying to know, and really a lot of community thinking and talking about end of life and trying to bring to life death literacy. So it's really neat. And at La Trobe, we identified that there's a whole lot of this work going on, and we don't really know. People don't really have access necessarily to the next step, or in terms of death literacy, they aren't able to kind of look at, well, okay, I'm high on this, that's great, but I'm not so good on this, but I'd actually like to improve it. That's something I want to improve. So we've developed this platform that really kind of brings to life all the evidence and brings to life these ideas. And you can go on and do a little quiz, and you literally can see how you compare to other people in Australia. And then there's links to where you can go and work on that bit, and
Oh, that's cool.
other kind of events and things that might be happening around the place. So it's really, in response to exactly your question, Aidan.
Okay. And is that out currently, or?
It'll be live in September.
Okay, great. So yeah, not long. Awesome.
Um,
Yeah, I'll check that out straight away. I saw literally I was listening to it a couple of days ago, but a podcast you were on with Andrew Denton, I think might have been last year.
yeah,
And a term came up that I hadn't heard before, and I was surprised how sort of much it struck me, and I've sort of resonated quite a lot with it. But I think he mentioned about the idea of leaving an emotional will at the end of your life. Could you just explain what that is?
yeah. So we all know what a will is, and most of us know what a will is, that it's a way to leave our assets to our family, whether it be money or property or other kind of things. An emotional will kind of fits more with a legacy need. So it's things that that you might not call an asset, but are actually important to you to hand on. So it might be an heirloom with a story. It might be a recipe. Could be a memory. All kinds of things. But an emotional will is a fantastic way to kind of send your love through beyond the assets that you might give to your family. It's a really people find it quite an emotional thing to do, as you can imagine, but a really rewarding experience for the person who might be writing that emotional will, but also for the family members who then receive it.
Yeah, like I said, I was surprised how moved I was by it, and even now, sort of getting a bit of goosebumps thinking about it. Just connecting that idea with, and even I think Andrew mentioned in that podcast, like, this is my favorite album of such and such, or this my favorite city in the world is such and such, and then every time, obviously, the person thinks of that city or travels there, it really gives you that immense connection that lasts long after the person has passed away.
Yeah, you said it so well, Aidan. Absolutely.
So, along that vein, what exactly, if you could put it into words, I guess, what exactly is that providing for the people left behind?
I imagine it, again, quite an individual response, but for anyone who's received anything like that, comfort, really, and connection. That kind of we used to think that, or we used to kind of say, I guess there's a belief around grief, for example, that you're meant to move on quickly and get over it, but we know that actually is not how grief works, and so I think an emotional will does do what we talk about, which is grief being a continuing bond with the person who has died. And that emotional will, I think, is an expression of that continuing bond. And it doesn't always make you cry, and it doesn't always make you laugh, but you kind of, you potentially do both those things in relation to the person who has died. And that's really healthy and a really neat kind of experience, I think. So it really does kind of shatter that idea that grief happens in stages, or, you've got to get over it and move on really quickly. But actually, no, it's just not how it works.
Mm. Speaking of grief, do you have any views on or ideas about why grief can look so different to different people?
Yeah. Well, when I was training a million years ago in the dark ages, we used to talk about. I learnt from a teacher way back, Mal McKissick. Actually, he used to say, we grieve as we lived and we die as we've lived as well. So we tend, if you're a big crier, you're probably going to cry a lot. If you're stoic, you're probably going to be more stoic. And you're probably just going to see a bigger or a deeper version of what was already there. So I think that partially explains that idea, Aidan.
Another aspect that I guess maybe modern Western culture is lacking, like you were mentioning earlier in the chat, but was a particular scene from that Ray Martin's documentary, The Last Goodbye, which I thought was really, they did a really good job of sort of covering lots of different aspects of the death process. But, culturally, different religions obviously have different practices and views. The scene where there was a Muslim family that were washing the family member who had died, obviously, very recently, can be quite confronting, seeing a dead body, and if you're not used to it, but, very intimate and healing as well. I guess that change over the last, like you said, sort of 100 years or maybe a bit less, where we've gone away from, there's obviously religion sort of faded out in a lot of ways, but different cultural practices have shifted too. How, and it doesn't have to be that extreme in terms of, if that's not what your practice is, now, but how can we start to increase some of that back into society?
That is the ultimate question, I think, for many of us doing kind of change work and have been at this work for a while. I think that it's multi-layered, Aidan. We need everything from, good policy to kind of supporting people well, to a kind of encouraging, I would say encouraging death literacy for people to kind of understand what their choices are. We can't go backwards, and we wouldn't want to go backwards. I don't want to live in a world that doesn't have antibiotics and treatments and things that meant that, meant that I lived in a family where many people died before their 20th birthday. I think that, there are a lot of changes that probably won't be kind of, from a societal point of view, undone as such. So I think it's got to be about people having access to and knowing what their choices are, because we actually have access to all of the things that we did 100 years ago. You can die at home. You can have a home funeral. You can literally be buried on your property if you want to be, depending on how large your property is and whether or not you got the right permissions in place. But all of those things mean that you have to know to do that, right? So there are actually a lot of options. You can still wash your dead. You can still care for your dead. You can transport the dead, for example. Many people don't necessarily want to take up those options. We're all glad for funeral directors, for the work that they do and the support that they provide families. But it is also important to know, for people to know that they can access funeral directors that will also encourage them to keep the body at home, the person at home, for as long as possible, for example, or dress their own dead, or coffin their own dead, for example, and do a lot of the care after death as well. So I think it's about knowing that we still have access to all those options from 100 years ago and deciding which ones of them that you want and the best way to potentially enact them in your situation. And that you also have the choice not to do any of those things if you don't want to, as well.
There you go. I learnt a lot then. I actually didn't know about the, but you can actually be buried on your own property and a few of those things. So I'm sure a lot of people don't know about those types of things that you can actually put in place.
That is really true. Don't be concerned about that. Only about 20% of the population necessarily know that they can access those options. Yeah, it's really
Yeah, wow.
something that many of us are trying to chip away at and encourage people to have access to. So, for example, when my mum died, she stayed at home overnight. That's what we wanted. When the funeral director came to pick mum up, whatever it was, 36 hours later, she dropped off the coffin. We kept the coffin. We decorated the coffin. We did that as a family, and then mum came back to the home, and we put her in her coffin, now newly decorated, covered in photos, filled with her favourite plants, including some of the tomato plants up the back. Sorry, Mum, we ripped out. And photos and all kinds of amazing things. The children were involved. We said goodbye at home. And, my father was able to kind of have that special time with Mum and say goodbye. And then, we walked her out as a family, dogs and all, out to the funeral van, and then went to the surf club and had her service that we led and ran. And we just had the most amazing funeral director who really enabled us and really were led by us. We knew what we wanted, how we wanted it to go, and they provided the structure and the infrastructure around us to make that happen. And everyone has the same rights to that kind of choice as well. But very
That's beautiful.
Yeah, really incredibly meaningful. And that kind of, I guess, goes back to one of your other questions about, what difference does it make as well. And yeah, it makes a difference to have access to meaningful ritual like that.
In another conversation, I've heard you say that death connects you to life. What do you mean by that?
Well, you can't not go through all of that, like what I was just talking about. I don't think you can go. You can't go through the death of a close person without it having some impact on your own kind of thinking about what is my life and what am I here for and what does this mean and how do I get on now this person has died. So yeah, it connects you to who you are and what you want, I think. Can't kind of avoid it.
Yes, brings that unseen into the scene, I think. So you've already mentioned a couple of resources that, especially the one coming up in September, that would be great for people to check out. Where should they go to stay up to date with any of your personal work and research that might be coming out in the future?
Yeah, the best place to look is on the Death Literacy Institute website, and we'll be publishing some of the new research. So we're just doing another national study now, right, like literally right now, and we're excited to see how that will go, and we will publish some of the findings through the institute, but also that work is connected to La Trobe University as well, and the Public Health Palliative Care Unit at La Trobe. So we'll be publishing and doing some work over the next few months that's very kind of public facing as well.
Great. Well, I'm very keen to see where this area takes you and society as a whole over the next X amount of years. And I think you're doing amazing work. So I really appreciate your time today, Kerrie. Thanks for that.
Thanks for the questions. Great conversation.